Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think we should talk about the elephant in the room. You knew it was coming. You have corny jokes. So, the elephant in the room, of course, for us to talk about here this morning isn't simply this elephant, but it's the reality that so many Christians are simply exhausted in their pursuit of the one who said that his burden was easy and his yoke was light. Isn't that a little ironic? Where is the easy yoke with all of the struggle and the striving that so many of us experience in our pursuit of Jesus? Do we have any excellent swimmers here? Like really, really good swimmers? Like anyone? No one? We don't have a single. Oh, we got a couple swimmer. You're a good swimmer? Yeah? What is it? So, how do you measure good swimming? Is it laps or is it like what makes you a good swimmer? Stamina. All right. So, there is a swim called the 20 Bridge Swim. It's right here in New York City. And this swim will, I think, take you on the East River, the Harlem River, and down the Hudson. And that feels just so disgusting to me in so many ways. I just can't even imagine it. But imagine that the water was clean for a minute. It's actually a marathon length swim. You imagine? That's some serious stamina. That takes a whole lot of training and prep and work and all of that. And if you are a really great swimmer, you should try the 20 Bridge Swim. Now, there is also a 135-mile river in Arkansas. And it is a lazy river. It is so lazy that you could actually take a tube and you could put a kid in it and you could tube that river for days on end. You could actually do like a 5 or 6 or 7 day tubing trip down that river. You imagine that? You just tube all day long. At night, you make camp. In the morning, you hop back out after breakfast, and you just tube some more. This feels like nearly an ideal trip for me right now. I think this would be an amazing thing. Just kind of leisurely going down, bring my elephant with me. This would be incredible. Now, here's the thing. You might be the absolute best swimmer in the entire room. You might be the best swimmer in the entire county or on Long Island. You could be Navy SEAL level swimmer, which for some reason I always associate the Navy SEALs as being great swimmers. I don't actually know if that's a thing, but for whatever reason, to me, they're the best swimmers imaginable. It's probably like synchronized swim dancers or something who are actually the ones, or water polo or something like this. But anyway, if you're one of those people and you continue to swim against the tide, then you will eventually fatigue. You will eventually tire out, and you will eventually fail. If you continue to fight the current of the river, you will eventually not be able to go as far as a child in a tube that is going with the current. And I think for many of us, we continue to thrash about and struggle and fight against the purposes, the plan, the will of God in our lives, which means, in effect, we're swimming against the current of the Spirit. And if we're swimming against the current of the Spirit, then we will fatigue, we will fail, unless we surrender to what the Spirit has for us. Now, we are coming up against the last of our series, of our messages for Building the Beacon. This is week 4 of a 5-week series that we've called Building the Beacon. Building the Beacon is a 3-year generosity initiative. So this is the kickoff of that 3-year generosity initiative. Now, tucked inside those 5 weeks of Building the Beacon is a 21-day spiritual journey. There's a lot to keep track of. This is an IQ test for the whole of the church. And so we got to keep up on these things just a little bit. But I think we're on like day 14. Is that right, Max? We're on day 14 of the spiritual journey, which was a way for us to create some space for God, because the goal of this 3-year generosity initiative is for us to be, as a congregation, spiritually and financially fit, spiritually and financially strong for whatever God has for us. And if you haven't been around in the last couple of weeks, then this is all brand new to you, then you're going to definitely want to pick up the brochure that is out there. The brochure has a lot of the information of what we're talking about. But in a nutshell, the Building the Beacon initiative is seeking to raise $2.25 million over the course of the next 3 years, and a Kickstart offering of $400,000. Now, the Kickstart offering is going to be used to get the work going and continued primarily on the main spaces where we need to have our first service there, which should be at the beginning of January. And so that is going to be the renovation of our worship space and the kids area. That's going to be a big part of what all of the Kickstart offering will go to. But then the rest of it, what comes after that, the remainder of the 2.25, the strategic sort of plan for that is to finish the renovations as quickly as possible, to not be distracted and to be tied down over the course of 10 or 15 or 20 years, just getting the building up and running at its full capacity. We're also going to continue the current ministries at full speed. Now, this is where if you're kind of familiar with these things, you go, well, that's an interesting decision, because the hope is that we have the resources we need so that everything we're currently doing can go on unhindered while we're doing this major renovation project. And if you've ever been a part of these things, they tend to fight each other a little bit. Our hope is, with the right resources, we'll be able to get more and more of the work done quickly so that we can actually keep all of the initiatives going. That means we want our restorative groups to keep cranking at full steam. It means every single kid that God entrusts to us, every kid in the next generation that God entrusts to us, that we will develop, train up, provide leadership for, and get them on mission trips. That means for all of the Sunday morning work that we do, for our outreach initiatives into the community, we want to just go full tilt on all of it. Now, that's already quite a tall order. But the third strategy in this is to continue to expand our reach to more people who are far from God. And one of the main reasons, I think, behind this, one of the reasons is that this has always been at the heart of who we are as a congregation. And every single year, God has opened up new opportunities for us. Over the last 20 years, new opportunities to reach people who are far from Him. And whenever those opportunities arise, whenever they start to present, we like to step into them with all of the vigor and the energy and the leadership and the development and all that we need in order to do that. Right now, what God's been putting on our hearts for many of us is what is going on with the college and young adults here on the island, really even across the whole of the country. There's some sort of a spiritual awakening that is going on in that generation like we haven't seen in a long time. I don't want us to sit on the bench for the next 3-4 years, distracted by the things that are keeping us busy, rather than do what God might have for us as we actually seek to fulfill the mission, to build the beacon, not in the building sort of a way, but in the people sort of a way. To add people to our spiritual family so that they might find hope in Jesus. And because that's what this is all about. It's not ultimately about a building. Where we've been, the buildings we've been in, how many different places, how many changes we've had over the years. That should teach, if any congregation should know that it isn't about a building, it should be us. The building is a great tool that God will use, and we will honor it, we will develop it in all the ways that we can. But building the beacon is about you, and it's about me. And it's about the people who will be folded into our community, who need to know about the hope that's found in Jesus. That's the gist of what we are participating here in, and we are now sort of rounding the corner, right? So next week is the last week. It is Commitment Sunday, and so for Commitment Sunday, here's what you can expect. We're going to gather together. We are going to worship, and we're going to pray, and we're going to teach a little and learn a little more. And we're going to visit Jonathan probably one last time in the story of Jonathan and Saul that we've been looking at over the course of this series. And we're going to have a commitment service at the end of our time. And so everybody will be invited, for those who are going to participate, to come on up and to make their commitment here. That'll be both the Kickstart offering and the pledge for the 3-year initiative. Now, what is all of this really about? It's about a surrender to the currents of the Spirit in our lives. Ultimately, that's what this is about. And in actuality, surrender is at the heart of the whole Bible. And I'm not saying that just to kind of overstate what we're trying to accomplish here. It's actually true. You could trace this idea of surrender from the very first, the 3rd chapter of the Bible, all the way through to the very end. The question is whether or not we will yield ourselves to whatever it is that God has for us. And we saw this just a touch in the life of Jonathan. So Jonathan has this crazy moment. It's really a kind of a bizarre turn of events in the story. Jonathan is the prince of Israel. His father is King Saul. Now, that means anything happens to King Saul, Jonathan is next in line to become the king. That's how it would have worked. He's going to become the next king of Israel. The thing is, God has already made a change in his plan for the kingdom of Saul. Now, Saul understands. He's seeing the writing on the wall here. And so Jonathan and David come up with a little plan to see whether or not King Saul is planning on hurting the future king, King David, who right now is one of his generals, but he is the shepherd, poet, giant slayer, Goliath killer guy. So that's the story we drop into. The next day, the 2nd day of the month, David's place was empty again. Then Saul said to his son Jonathan, "Why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today?" Jonathan answered, "David earnestly asked me for permission to go to Bethlehem." This is an interesting little twist here, because Saul won't call David by his name. He calls him the son of Jesse. And I think this is because he's already thinking in terms of lineage, right? It's King Saul and his son Jonathan. Jonathan is son of Saul. David, well, he's just the son of, who is that guy? Oh yeah, Jesse something. I think he's a shepherd. You know, he won't even give him his name at this point, because he wants Jonathan thinking in terms of legacy. David, Jonathan tells him, "David asked me for permission to leave for a little bit." Not true, it's a total ruse. He said, "Let me go because our family is observing a sacrifice in the town and my brother has ordered me to be there. If I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away to see my brothers." That's why he hasn't come to the king's table. Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said, Saul gets all upset. Why? If David's just off visiting his family, why would you be upset? Because Saul has every intention of killing David. If he kills David, he clears the path for his son Jonathan to become the next king and establish Saul's kingdom for generations to come. And David is a threat to that kingdom. "You son," this is Saul, "you son of a perverse and rebellious woman." Can we just note the irony? Because he's also his son. Why couldn't he have just said, "You son of a perverse and rebellious man"? No, he's like, no. This must be your mother's fault that you were so weird and twisted in this way. "Don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse," that's David, "to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you?" I mean, he is doubling down on this. You are humiliating your mother, your heritage, your family, your future kids. You are robbing all of this from them. You are the rightful king. I am the rightful king. And you are jeopardizing everything by siding with David. "As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die." Saul understands it. Jonathan should understand it. Jonathan, if he's going to be king, David must die. And Jonathan is doing all sorts of weird things. He's moving in completely unexpected ways. Earlier on, it says, Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Where does that sound familiar? The second great commandment, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing, gave it to David, along with his tunic, and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Unusual behavior. So the prince of Israel knows full well who David is. And he is laying himself out in full surrender. And in this moment, David becomes a bit of a Christ figure for us. Right? This is the one who, for Jonathan, should be his ultimate rival. And he's laying down his sword. Imagine this. He is taking off his armor. He is leaving himself. David is quite the warrior. He's already proven himself super effective in battle. And Jonathan is laying his sword down. He's saying, I'm not going to swing a sword against David. I won't use my bow to attack him from far. I will lay these down at his feet in complete and full surrender. David can do what he wants with me at this point. He could attack me, and he could wipe out any threat to his throne. David could have just reversed the tables right here. Jonathan is just surrendering it. Why? How? How could Jonathan think to do any of this? Just because he loved David as he ought to love himself? And earlier in the story, and later, we found out that Samuel had spoken to Saul and to Jonathan. While David was at Horesh in the desert of Ziph, he learned that Saul had come out to take his life. So Saul's coming after David. And Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength in God. So while David is fearful, his would-be murderer, Saul, his son, is coming out to support and encourage David, try to give him strength in God. And what he tells David is significant. Don't be afraid. My father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this. The prophet Samuel had already told them that David was going to be the new king. This was clear as day to Jonathan. For Jonathan, this wasn't about asserting his rights. This was about submitting himself to the plan of God, surrendering, giving up whatever claim he might have on the kingdom of Israel, on the big seat, because God had already promised the kingdom to David. When he says, I'll be second, he's not saying, I want to be your prince. I want to be second in command. He's saying, I'm second to you. You're primary. He's like, sort of like John the Baptist when he was, when they were saying, hey, this Jesus guy, he's getting all popular out there. And John the Baptist was like, I must become lesser. He must become greater. That's the essence of surrender. We have to become lesser. Jesus has to become greater. That means we're submitting ourselves to the currents of the Holy Spirit. And we get to ride those currents wherever they will lead. We get to stop shaking our fist at God, picking up arms against him, struggling and fighting against his plans for our lives, whipping our arrows into the darkness, trying to reel against his plan. We get to be fully exposed, armor laid down, clothing laid before him bare, because we can trust the plan of God in our lives. We get to surrender to his will. So Cheryl and I came to the island. It was about 28 years ago or so, something now. And we were really excited. It was our first church kind of out of seminary. We'd been involved in church and ministry for some years, but this was our first official position outside of seminary. And it was at a church up in the North Shore. And the church was really neat in many ways. They were struggling, though, because they were in a season of intense transition. And so the lead pastor at the time, Brian, he had been trying to sort of lead the church into this new season. This was kind of like, the worship wars and all that, like, moving from hymns to contemporary music. It was organs to drums and electric guitar, and it was changing in board structures from, kind of deacon and trustees to an elder-led model, and all sorts of different theological and kind of cultural, political things going on. And it was rough. It got pretty tough. It got so tough. There was so much infighting. that I went to Brian one day and I was like, Brian, I'm like, this is rough, man. Like, we're fighting. I don't mind fighting for the kingdom. I expected that. I thought we would be fighting principalities and powers of this dark age. Like, I didn't know we'd be fighting choir directors and like administrators and like each other. I was like, this isn't what I signed up for. And he said, Robert, this is the local church. You got to get used to it. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is a big part of what he had known all these years, what he had experienced. And I came home and I remember telling my wife, you know, we're like 5 years into the 6 years into the pursuit of ministry. And I was like, hey, babe, I think I made a mistake. I don't think we're supposed to be in ministry. She's like, what? I'm like, I think business is probably, we should return and we should go back because this, I don't mind getting involved in doing ministry, but I can't do it in the local church like this. It's just, this isn't the fight I want to fight for the rest of my life. It's just not. And so we talked, we prayed, we kind of worked our way through that for a little bit, and we kind of felt something might be off, and maybe it was just a transition. We weren't really sure. But of course, it meant that I really wanted to get out of there. And so any job opportunity that would come our way, we were very interested in because I wanted out. And so I don't know what it was, year 3, year 4, something like that. We get a call. It's a friend of a friend, and he says, hey, listen, there's a church upstate over in Orange County. They're looking for someone. I think you'd be a good fit. So we met. The pastor was amazing. He was like this great big old like teddy bear, I'm going to take this mountain for Jesus kind of guy. And so he had all of the passion and vigor, but he also had this like gentle and caring spirit. And I was like, oh man, I could like really benefit from that right now because I'm feeling way beat up. And so we were like, you know, this will be neat. And we find out about the job, and I got the right skill set for it. It's going to be challenging, but it's certainly something that I was excited about. The pay was better than anything I had been getting. And I was like, oh, this is so great. God brought us out here, but it was for this. And so Cheryl and I prayed, and we prayed, and we prayed, and we just couldn't get the sense that we were able to leave. And it sounds weird and mystical, but we knew that leaving would be rebellion to what God's plan was. And so our surrender in that moment was to stay exactly where we were and to just let that current take us wherever it would. After I told the pastor we weren't interested in the job, I came home, told my wife, apparently we know one thing for sure. God doesn't like me. Because otherwise, he would have given me the better job. And so he clearly doesn't like me. Then a year or so goes by, and my aunt calls me, and she says, Robert, the church that you got saved in as a child, like right when you guys left the Catholic Church, it was a vacation Bible school. I remember you accepted Jesus as like a little kid. And she's like, that church is hiring. It's right over in New Jersey. It's right near your family. And it's a huge church, and they got all sorts of resources. And I go and I meet with the guy, and we just hit it off. We're like bosom buddies right out of the gate. And everything seems amazing. The guy is amazing, and the job is perfect for me. And the pay was great. Did I mention the pay was great? The pay was great, and I was like, this is incredible. Like, this is why God didn't give us the first job, because this is historic. Like, I actually could tell the story of having come to faith here. No wonder we had to, God does like me. And then we prayed, and we prayed, and we prayed, and we prayed, and we never got a sense that God was letting us leave. And so I had to go and I had to turn down this other job because we were surrendering yet again into the current, into the flow of what the Spirit was doing. And the decisions, the things that we had to give up along the way, the surrendering of our own will and our own way, and even the financial part of it, like all of it, we were just feeling like this overwhelming sense of just God is calling us to a season of surrender. So I had to tell the guy that I wasn't interested. Came home, told Cheryl, all right, well, now it's sure, now it's clear. I'm not even sure he likes Cheryl anymore because, like, I'm a miserable person to live with at this point. And so, and then it was some years later, the church on the North Shore was kind of turning it around and things were starting to happen. And they got a new pastor in, and we were like, all right, like, this is like, things are going pretty good, except me and the new pastor, we didn't get along great because I'm actually a terrible person to have in your employ. And so it was like, I wasn't great for him at all. I was like crushing his soul. And And one day, Cheryl and I, we were on vacation, and somebody had let us borrow their house out east. It was like near Montauk or something. And we were walking on the beach, and we were with the kids, and I said, hon, I feel like something might be shifting in my soul. Like, I feel like we might be able to leave. And she was like, well, it's maybe, like, let's pray about it. We prayed about it, and we both came to the conviction that it was time to leave. And at the time, Beacon was just an idea in our hearts that was kind of birthing out of a prayer meeting that we were a part of. But we had nowhere to go to. Us leaving was leaving. And it was leaving with no plan as to what would happen next. Even if we tried to start the church, there was no promises. There was no guarantee that any of it would work. It's not like we had some big investor scheme behind us or anything like that. This was a huge moment where Cheryl and I and our three kids, we had to simply surrender. And we had to get into the current of the Spirit of God and let him take us where he would. This has been, of course, for us now. We look back on all of those twists and turns and shifts, and we realize exactly what God was doing. He was preparing us and building up the resilience and all of the kinds of things that we would need, and the faith and the surrender to do what God was calling us to do in the middle of the county, which eventually became Beacon. And so I look back at it now and I think this is why when we know what it is, or we feel like what God is calling us to do, it's actually easier rather than kick against it, rather than strive and struggle and try to swim against the current. It's actually easier for us to simply go and do what God is calling us to do. And that has been our continued practice. Now, I'd said we're rounding the corner, and we really are, because we are coming up to Commitment Sunday. And we all understand, if you've done any sort of self-reflection, that one of the areas that we resist surrendering in is in our finances. It's with our money. And this is just simply, and it's true as soon as you give it any thought, because if you think about, you're like, oh, money isn't that big a deal for me. It's not something I really think about. Just think about it. How much of your time, your energy, your creativity is spent trying to figure out how to make money, or actually making money? And whatever time isn't spent actually pursuing it, how much is spent managing the stuff your money bought? How much of your life is tied up in plans to spend it, plans to save it? Right? I mean, if you start to think about it, you're going to realize, oh my goodness, it's a huge part of my life. Which means, of course, it's a huge part of the spiritual journey, and whether or not we are willing and able to surrender in it. Through our journey, Cheryl and I have had to re-up many a time and surrender yet again when it comes to our finances, so that we will know and God will show us that it isn't an idol in our lives, that it doesn't have final say, that Jesus has final say in our lives. Now, I know that people often get uncomfortable speaking about money in church. I totally get it. You have good reason to. Most of us have had really bad experiences at some point in our lives. When I was younger, I was a teenager. I actually left the faith for like 2-3 years, really almost entirely, largely in my recollection of it, because the churches I was a part of at the time, all they did was talk about money, largely beating people up. In fact, ironically, it was in the context of a build out of a new building. And I literally was gone for like three years, really till I met Cheryl, and she brought me back to church because she had all this Catholic guilt about our relationship. That's another story. Anyway, but I get it. I understand it. And I just, full transparency, I don't like talking about it either. I really don't, especially when we're talking about it. I'd much rather talk about it when we're not talking about the church actually getting any sort of money. Then I'm much more comfortable. I'd much rather talk about it at another church. And there's all sorts of reasons, and I think most of us can kind of get those and understand those. But I do recognize that it can be uncomfortable. But you know who wasn't uncomfortable talking about money? Jesus. Not even a little. And some people have done these studies where they say 15% of his teaching have to do with possessions or money. 16 of his 38 parables, 1 of 10 verses in the Gospels. Someone believes, you'd have to count it to verify, 500 verses on prayer, 500 on faith, 2,000 on money and possessions. Why? Why is this possible? Because Jesus knows that there is no separating our spiritual journey from our financial journey. You can't separate them. They're part and parcel. You can't actually pull it apart. And he knows why the soul will often resist surrender in these areas. And he is not willing to let it remain untouched in our soul. So, what is the biggest problem with money? What's the biggest problem? You guys know. You don't have enough, right? I mean, isn't that the biggest problem we all have with money? We don't have enough. I was praying recently, and I said, God, tell me, what is 10 million years like to you? And I heard God's voice. He said to me, it's like 1 second. But he said it much deeper. It's like 1 second, because it's God. And so he has a deeper voice. Then the next day I was like, oh God, please tell me, Lord, what is $10 million like to you? And God said to me, I heard his voice, it was audible. He said, in a deep voice, he said, it's like 1 penny. I was like, oh man, you're so big. That's amazing. This is incredible. So the next day, I decided to pray again, and I said, God, could you give me just 1 penny? And I heard his voice clear as day. He said to me, absolutely, just 1 second. No, it did not happen. That was not a true story, in case you're new here. And you're like, this guy's weird. He's hearing God's voice. So the real problem isn't that we don't have enough money. The real problem with money, according to Jesus, is that you can't take it with you. Can you say that with me? You can't take it. That was so half-hearted. Is this stinging a little bit? Let's say that with actually as if we really believe this. Ready? You can't take it with you. Jesus, this is a big part of what he tells us. The parable in Luke 12, he tells this whole big story about this guy. He has this bumper crop year. He's building out his infrastructure. He rips down his barns. He builds new barns. God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. That's what's going to happen. That's how Jesus wants us to understand our relationship to money. You can't take it with you. Rockefeller, one of the wealthiest men at the time who had ever lived, he died, and his accountant was asked. It's kind of one of those famous little quips where they said, so how much did Mr. Rockefeller leave? And what did the accountant say? All of it. He left all of it. Just like all of us will leave all of it. Randy Alcorn, he wrote a book called The Treasure Principle. He said, when Jesus warns us not to store up treasures on earth, it's not just because wealth might be lost, it's because wealth will always be lost. Either it leaves us while we live, or we leave it when we die. No exceptions. Realizing its value is temporary should radically affect our investment strategy. According to Jesus, storing up earthly treasures isn't simply wrong, it's just plain stupid. Just plain stupid. Now that's the bad news. The good news is actually found in Matthew chapter 6. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. This is crazy. Who thought that something in the temporal world could extend in this kind of a concrete way into the eternal world? See, the corollary to this is not simply that you can't take it with you, but you can send it on ahead. Can you guys say that with me? But you can send it on ahead. You can send it on ahead. Now think about this. The way he explains it is you can store up for yourselves. He's not even just simply talking about the impact in the kingdom and in other people's lives. If you're investing in eternal things here, you will see it when you get there. The way Randy Alcorn, again, he said it. If we give instead of keep, if we invest in the eternal instead of in the temporal, we store up treasures in heaven that will never stop paying dividends. Whatever we store up on earth will be left behind when we leave. Whatever treasures we store up in heaven will be waiting for us when we arrive. So you cannot take it with you, but you can send it on ahead. And this is a huge and wildly important part of our conversation about what it means to surrender, because in preparation for the Building the Beacon Commitment service, I want to just give you just a touch, a little guidance and encouragement. So when we're talking about, we talk about tithes and offerings and things like that. What we're talking about is what God is calling us to do. And for many of us, the tithe is simply what God tells us to do. So we tithe. Cheryl and I never discuss it. We don't talk about it. We get raises every year. I raise a tithe. There's nothing for us to talk about. This is what we do. Followers of Jesus, we tithe. But what we're talking about now with Building the Beacon is more akin to what you would have called a free will offering in the Old Testament. It's what we give above and beyond. See, it's not helpful if Cheryl and I, for example, let's say Cheryl and I gave $12,000 a year to the church. For us to split that into our tithe and $6,000 into our offering, that's not actually gonna help the congregation. It's not gonna help the church, because the board, we have a board of volunteers who are also themselves givers, by the way, who set the budget. I don't set the budget. I don't set my own salary. I don't set my benefits or anything like that. The board sets the budget. It is my responsibility to keep the church spending and on budget. That's kind of the relationship we have. And so some of you know Eric or Derek or Jeb. These are the folks who are on the board. And they actually set the financial decisions of the church for the whole of the year. Well, if Cheryl and I gave $12,000 last year, that's now part of their budget, meaning all of the normal functioning and ministries of the church, they're largely saying, well, they gave $12,000, he's likely to give $12,000 again this year, and they set that across the whole of the congregation. If we're looking to find out what else we can do above and beyond that, then for me and Cheryl to redesignate part of it isn't going to be helpful. It's actually going to be confusing and might get us, it might make things way more complicated. So for me and Cheryl, we have to figure out what we would do above and beyond that. That's our free will offering. And you know what the Bible tells you, what percentage you do for a free will offering? It's free will. There's no number, which is the cool part, because that's why we're doing this, the part where we're creating room to hear from God. It might even be why God does it, so that it brings us into communication with him, so that we can explore our own desire and willingness and ability to surrender all that we have before him. So we are in this place where it is kind of our last week here. You have the spiritual journey. You're going to be praying, seeking God's face, having the conversations you might need to have, and coming prepared with our offering for next week. For me and Cheryl, we will have both our Kickstart offering available next week, and we will be making our pledge for the 3 years. And for us, we consider this to be part of our act of surrender. Just in this season of life, this is what God would have us to do. But I want to be very clear. Giving is going to cost you. Giving to Building the Beacon will cost. And you're like, well, of course it will. That's obvious. It is, but I think it's important for us to just stop and recognize what this means. So most of us have income and we have a budget, we have expenses. And they mostly all kind of average out at the end of the year, where hopefully you have a little bit left over. But generally, we mostly end up spending most of what we have, because that's the way our lives are currently structured. Rarely will people have giant piles of money left over at the end of the year. If you have giant piles of money left over at the end of the year, we should talk. I have ideas. But if you're like most people, and like me and Cheryl, you don't have giant piles of money sitting around. What you have are budgets. You have lines. You have expectations on your spending. And Cheryl and I, we're not hand to mouth. We haven't been hand to mouth for quite a few years. And so for us, we still have fresh fruit shipped in from around the world, and we drink Nespresso coffee, from a machine in the mornings, and we have vacations. And so, but for us, at the end of the year, there's not all of these piles of money that we can just say, oh, let's just give this. This is a decision that we will have to make of things that will change for us. That's what I mean when I say it's going to cost us. And and that's what we really have to recognize. If you're really going to join us and make a pledge, and that is between you and God. God loves a cheerful giver. Do nothing out of compulsion or under pressure or anything like that. Not shame, not guilt. None of these are motivators in any sort of a way that ought to be in the Christian's heart. We are saved by God's grace. This is a gift back to God. It is not to be compulsory in any sort of a way. But if you join us in this, it will cost you. It will mean there'll be a housing project that doesn't get done or it gets delayed. It'll mean you have to drive the car a few extra years because you can't upgrade. It'll mean for many of you that your clothing, your wardrobe has to stay a little bit more stable. You won't be able to get that shiny new accessory that you want to have. It might be Starbucks runs that don't happen. It will cost you. What is it that God is asking you to surrender toward that end? And wrestle with that. It's actually a life-giving discipline. We'd encourage you to use the whole of this last week to be seeking God in that way and attuning your ears to his voice. Now, as I invite the band to come on out, I want to pray a prayer of consecration for us. So would you stand? I told you the whole of the Bible story was about surrender, and it really is. You could go all the way back to Adam and Eve. They refused to surrender, and they plunged humanity into rebellion against God. Abraham, he did surrender, and he ended up going into an unknown land and putting his family and his wealth at risk. We know that Abraham's nephew Lot refused to do that and ended up in turmoil and trouble down near Sodom and Gomorrah. We know that Moses did surrender. His fears, his uncertainty, risked his life, and ultimately led the people of God out of slavery in Egypt. We know that Saul refused to surrender to God's plan, but Jonathan surrendered to it. We know that Judas refused the mission that Jesus had. He despised what he was all about, and so he sold him out for 30 pieces of silver. And yet Jesus did surrender. He surrendered the whole of his life on the cross so that the mission of God, the salvation of humanity, could be made available to us. Father, I'm just asking that you would stir us each up, each one of our hearts, Father, not out of any sort of sense of guilt or shame or anything like that, but Father, instead, you would do a work of surrender in our souls, that you, Lord, would allow us to hear your voice, that still small voice, that we would know what you're calling us to do, and then we would with courage do whatever it is. I pray for the whole of our congregation, Lord, as we embark on this exciting new chapter, that, Lord, this would not be a divisive season in any way, but a deeply unifying season. That, Father, we would grow together, we would grow deeper with you, with each other, that we would sense your blessing being poured out upon us time and again in a multitude of ways. The very blessings that you promised us, Lord, as we hold our hands open before you in surrender. May we lay down our arms. May we lay down our sword and our bow and our armor. May we be fully transparent and exposed to your loving gaze, that we might know you. Experience, Father, all that you have for us individually and as a spiritual family. We pray it in Jesus' name, and God's people said, amen.